Start recording. Okay, so let's start today with this. Okay. Vicky, if I say aging to you, what comes to mind? What do you think of when I say aging? Sorry? Wrinkles. Okay. Okay. Yes, I got plenty of those right here and those kinds of things. Okay. Good. Good. Brother, what about you? I say aging. What comes to mind? Other than wrinkles. Okay. Okay. Lesser ability to move well. Okay. Madison, do you think of like particular people when you think of aging?
Yeah, my grandparents.
Your grandparents, okay? Your grandparents. Okay. So I think to begin to appreciate, all of you guys are talking about maybe things that accompany aging. Okay. But I think to also kind of appreciate what's going on with this, we need to have a little bit of a definition of what does it mean to age. Okay. Lauren, to you, if I say that a person is aging, right? What does that mean? I am, I think, like basically twice as old as just about all of you. So I have aged more than you guys. Why? What's gone on with me that makes me different from you guys?
It means that several naturally occurring processes that come with getting older
Have occurred. Okay. Now I feel sort of attacked, but yes, you're right. But like it's most different. Are you guys older now than you were a year ago? Okay. Have you aged? Of course you have, right? So the first piece of this that I want us to understand is that in one sense, aging simply means I've been alive longer than someone else. Or I've been alive longer than I had been a minute ago, or an hour ago, or a year ago. Okay. So in that way, the process of aging is just simply the inevitable kind of slow creep of time as we scream towards death at an alarmingly slow rate. Okay. So that part of things is part of aging. Okay. The other thing that sort of Lauren mentioned and that Nikki mentioned and that Riley mentioned is there are some mostly inevitable changes that occur in anatomy, in physiological processes, okay, in cellular processes that are going on that are going to happen as we age. There's this inevitable change. As we are here longer, this stuff is going to happen. Okay. So what we're going to try to cover a little bit of today is what are some of the things physiologically that happen as we age? What are the changes that normally occur? And then what are the role that obesity, physical activity, exercise, resistance training, those types of things, what role can they play in the extent to which these changes do or don't occur with aging? Okay? That's going to kind of be the other thing. So the reason that it's important to understand and to study some of the things that happen with aging is that everybody ages, and as we live longer and longer, sort of my parents' generation, they're able to live longer. We're going to be in a place in another 8 to 10 years that about 1 in 5 people are going to be over the age of 65. Okay. Any of you guys that want to work in any sort of healthcare thing, older people are the folks that access healthcare. As they live longer, they're going to access healthcare more. They're going to be, you guys are going to see these people. And so this is a relatively new-ish phenomenon as we live longer. And the thing that happens when you live longer, you'd like to be able to function and have some level of quality of life, right? You know, my parents are coming tomorrow, and they're basically coming to help Ellis decorate our Christmas tree, and they want to see something, but they want to be able to pick her up and run around with her, and chase her around, and do the other things that they want to do. And as you guys will be able to see, some of the physiological changes that happen with aging, as Riley pointed out, are going to make it more difficult for us to walk, to run, to jump, to lift things, to carry things, right? To bathe ourselves in some kind of very basic activities of daily living function. Right? So what we need to understand is how much of that is inevitable and how much can we okay? Here's the percentage of the population in a particular state that's aged 65 or up. The darker blue is going to denote places where there's a larger portion of the population that is a little bit older, okay? And so what I find to be pretty wild is that we would oftentimes used to think that like Florida is where people retire, so you'd think they would have a larger portion of their population that would be a little bit older than that. But the idea, though, is just really, really simply that, especially in some of these places where it's warmer and stuff, this is where people tend to live as they get older. Okay? So we're going to talk about, at least initially here, what are the changes that happen in the neuromuscular system? What are the changes that happen in the cardiovascular system? Okay, and things that are going to be a normal part of the aging process. Okay, so the big thing, okay, that happens with aging in the neuromuscular or kind of the motor, our ability to move system, is a decrease in muscle mass and a decrease in strength. Okay, as you age, you lose muscle. As you age, you lose strength. Okay, anybody know what that is oftentimes called? There's a very specific term for the age-associated loss of muscle mass and strength.
Is it sarcopenia?
It is sarcopenia. Very good, Karen. Okay, it's called sarcopenia. We'll talk about in a few slides kind of what is the age at which this begins to happen. Okay, we have to generally be older than me even for this to happen. Even though I can tell you guys that you know, there's probably been some decline on mine. So the consequences of this loss of mass and strength can be significant. Okay, muscles don't function as well. You're not as strong, so they don't function as well. We lose our ability to move fast. We lose our dexterity or our coordination on some things. And it also, because of some of these things, leads to an increased risk of falling down, breaking your hip, okay, things like that happening, and an increase in disability. I can't do the things that I want to be able to do, okay? All of the things that most of us take for granted because we have a sufficient amount of strength may begin to have to be modified. You may not even be able to do it as you get older, okay? We'll give some examples of this as we move along. Okay, so here's some interesting kind of things that I think illustrate a little bit of what's going to happen. Generally, what we tend to see here, we have age on the x-axis, and we have right the percentage of your maximal strength compared to what it was when you were 20. Let's just say. Okay. We oftentimes make the assumption that it's generally okay. It's not the best. That you guys are probably about as strong right now as you're ever going to be in your life. For those of you that have not ever resistance trained and you take up resistance training at some point as you get a little bit older, this will not be when you're your strongest, but this is a rough kind of approximation. And so what we want to be able to illustrate with this graph is you can see that this red line shows the decline in maximal leg strength with age. Okay, under the age of 60, very often we see about a 10 to maybe 15% decline in strength per decade. Okay? So it's about 1% a year. It's not a huge amount from one year to the next, but if you accumulate enough time, then it's going to go down a reasonable amount. Okay? What you see here in the pink is this is a range of strength that is going to be required to go from sitting to standing. Okay? So if we ask Phoebe to go from sitting down to standing up, based upon her body weight, she needs a certain amount of strength to do that. To do it quickly, she needs roughly about 70% of her maximal strength in those landings, and slowly about 40%. And so what you can see then is that as strength begins to decline, you're going to potentially get into a range where I don't have enough strength to stand up very fast. And if it declines farther, I may not have enough strength to stand up from sitting by myself at all. And that's going to be the really key thing, is we want to keep people at the bare minimum in this place where they can go from standing from sitting, from sitting to standing. Okay. And if possible, we want to keep them kind of up in this way. Okay. So that's what we're working with. That's what we're working with. There's a couple of ways that we can try to achieve that in that. Okay. And one of those things is illustrated in the panel on the right here. What this shows is, again, age on the x-axis, and this is peak knee extensor strength, which we are again going to assume occurs at about 20 years of age. And what I want you to note is, look at my strength trained men versus my untrained men. So these are guys that are doing resistance training. One, they're stronger to begin with, okay? And as they continue to strength train over time, they're going to have a little bit less of a decline. And as it begins to decline, they're still going to be quite a bit stronger than our untrained. Right? So, our two ways to try to keep yourself having enough strength to do this stuff throughout your life is get really strong now, okay? So that you've got farther to fall off before you ever reach the place where it's going to be a problem. Or, I would say, and probably rather than or, train now, get as strong as you can, and then continue to try to train over time. There's going to be some inevitable loss, very likely over time, through some other mechanisms, but it will help you presumably. Okay? So, with sarcopenia, here are some MRI data. Here is a youngish person, probably a guy given the lack of subcutaneous adipose tissue on the lateral side of the thigh here. Here's a youngish person. Here is a still pretty lean older person. Okay, you'll just note that the muscles are small. Part of this comes from decreasing fiber size. Okay, and the thing that we tend to see is you tend to lose more mass in the larger weight-bearing muscles than you do in small ones. Okay? And a lot of that comes simply from inactivity. Okay, inactivity. You guys are going to be less active when you're my age, and you're less active still. I want to say when you're your parents' age, but we're probably not that far out of the road. Your parents will be active. Reach your grandparents' age. Right? So part of what we see is that we tend to lose strength before you lose muscle mass. You will lose strength year over year over year. It may be sometime into your mid-40s or 50 for most of you before you really begin to see kind of measurable declines in muscle mass. Okay? Weirdly enough, people use grip strength, just like what we measured in lab. People use grip strength as a measure of sarcopenia. You wouldn't think like, oh, I'm going to lose all this forearm muscle mass and things, but it's a pretty reasonable surrogate for kind of measuring what is happening. Okay? Grip strength correlates to strength in other muscles. So there's a lot of data showing kind of the effects of this. Okay? The other thing that happens with aging, okay? So it was just Thanksgiving. How many of you saw your grandparents or great-grandparents at Thanksgiving? A few of you guys did, okay? Were they moving around very fast? We're gonna have a race between your grandparents and you. Who's gonna win the race? You guys, okay? So one of the reasons is they're a little bit older, they're not as strong, that matters. But the other thing that happens with aging is we seem to lose, as we lose muscle mass, what we lose are type 2 muscle fibers. We lose fast twitch fibers, okay? You can see a shift from 2X to 2A anyway, but we also have total type 2 fibers tend to go down, okay? And type 1 fibers will tend to go up, which I know we talked about, that we're not turning the 2s into 1s with training, but there's something else that's happening, okay? There are some interesting data on a group of folks that they tracked for about 20 years, from 1974 until the early 90s. And so these were endurance trained folks, and this is the percentage of the muscle biopsy that was slow twitch fibers. And so our folks that were highly aerobically trained and maintained all of that, they didn't really have a lot of shift. Okay? Our fitness trained people had a shift up, as did our untrained people. So what you can see is that the percentage of their muscle that was type 1 fibers has gone up. What has happened is their type 2 fibers lose their innervation. The motor neurons in your spinal cord are going to die. Okay? And as they die, then the connection that they have to those muscle fibers is going to break. And what then happens is you get branching off of the axons from the existing type 1 fibers to try to go back and connect again to those fibers that just lost their innervation. And a weird thing happens. When the axon from type 1 fibers goes and connects to what used to be type 2 fibers, they turn into type 1. So there's this kind of wild fiber type conversion. Okay? That's going to explain. So part of the reason that grandma can't beat you in a race is because she's got fewer fast twitch fibers than you do. Okay? And we've had some conversion. This is why the reaction time falls partially. It's why their running speed and movement velocities. Okay. We mentioned a little bit of this, talking about changes with sarcopenia, with osteoporosis, and low back pain, and those things. But if we look in the skeletal system, we're going to see decreases in bone mineral density, especially in postmenopausal women, which leads to an increased risk of fracture. But we also see decreases in the elasticity of connective tissue. Okay, the collagen in those connective tissue things and tendons and ligaments and stuff is going to become a little less elastic. We're going to see decreases in range of motion at particular joints. Your tendons become more stiff. Because they're more stiff and they're more susceptible to injury. And a lot of these things are simply due to disuse. Some of this decrease in bone density is inevitable, but a lot of it can be prevented by staying active. The elasticity or lack of it in your joints because of changes in collagen and the tendons and ligaments can be prevented by staying active. These are things that we're going to see. Okay, so if you want to do physical therapy or occupational therapy, you can see a lot of older individuals that are going to come in and they're going to have a reduced range of motion. They're not going to be able to move in a particular joint. The joints aren't going to respond in the way that's what younger folks did. And there's some particular exercises that we can use to try it out. Additionally, there's central nervous system types of things, okay? The ability to send signals from the brain to your muscles or to other places in the body is going to go down as neuron numbers in both the brain and the spinal cord are going to fall off. So you lose coordination, you lose reaction time, you lose some cognitive ability, some memory ability because of all of this. A lot of this can be prevented though, simply by staying or being physically active, engaging those neurons as we age. Okay? So The thing that we know that best deals with a lot of these physiological consequences of aging is physical activity. Walking, running, biking, jogging, and especially resistance training. Okay. Here we have my older gentleman with a sweet mustache is about to either do a little bit of deadlift, maybe power clean or something here. These are things that are really, really good for what goes on. Okay. So strength training is good. There's a lot of variability among individuals based upon a host of sort of changes in hormones and genetic factors, but it really in a lot of instances comes down to this idea of use it or lose it that we talked about previously with resistance training. Right? Some of the sarcopenic losses of muscle mass are simply due to being less active. Some of it some of it's due to declines in estrogen and testosterone. Okay. We can do resistance training, or if you're Celeste alone, you just take growth hormone and testosterone and these kinds of things, and you can have just as much muscle at 65 as you did at 25. Okay, but for most people, there's plenty of evidence that resistance training works. Very, very good evidence. Okay. What we see in older individuals that do training, especially lower body training, is improved mobility. They can walk faster, they can get up and down stairs easier, improved ability to perform activities of daily living. Okay, so carrying groceries, getting into and out of the bathtub, ironing clothes, doing laundry, taking out the garbage, all of those things seem to get better. Okay. And it prolongs the period of functional independence. That's the other big thing. Okay? It's the other big thing. We'll talk on Monday about mental health things. A big issue with folks as they age is depression. And one of the things that comes and that leads to some of that depression is a loss of functional independence. Okay? Imagine you have to rely on your roommate or your best friend, if you have one, to help you go to the store, to help you take a shower, to help you put your clothes on, like every day, okay? And you've spent 65, 75, 80 years of your life mostly being able to do it all by yourself. So as we lose this functional independence, it's not only bad for us from a cardiovascular and an obesity and from a diabetic standpoint, it's also bad from a mental health standpoint. So resistance training does these things. By having more muscle, it improves metabolic health, it lowers our risk of type 2 diabetes, it helps maintain bone mineral density, and it helps us maintain balance and coordination, so we have less risk of fall. Okay, so here's some data that I think are pretty astounding. So these are things that were published in 1990, so they're a little over 30 years old now. But this was one of the first studies where they did true resistance training in very old adults, okay? 86 to 96 years old. Right? These were individuals that lived in an assisted living home, and they had lots of chronic, sort of cardiovascular and other types of chronic health conditions. They did 8 weeks of resistance training, where they had these folks do a couple of days a week, 3 sets of 8 reps with 80% of them in reps. So this is these very old individuals doing heavy progressive resistance training. Okay? Heavy progressive resistance training. What do we find when we did it? One, they didn't think these people could be able to do it. They found in 8 weeks their knee extensor strength. So this was mostly knee extension exercise. Strength went up almost 200%. Okay, these folks got a lot stronger. It didn't plateau, it seemed to go up all the time. Their walking speed went up 50%. Okay, there were 2 of those individuals that, because of their increase in strength and walking speed, didn't need walking aids anymore. There were 3 of them that could not get up out of a chair by themselves at the start. And after doing this training program, were then able to do it. Okay, so this, I hope, was one of the first times that we illustrated that even these very old, very frail individuals with chronic conditions, one, they can do this training. It's a feasible thing that they can do relatively safely. And there are these huge, huge improvements that we see in them from these dogs. Right? Huge improvements. Okay. So the next question was, all right, well, that worked. Do we really, really need to do 80% of one rep max? Is doing high intensity stuff really the thing that has to happen in this particular population? There's a lot of folks are intimidated by that. They don't want to do that. If they've got bone and joint problems, then they think that that's going to be dangerous. Right? So do we have to lift like Arnold to be able to hang on to some of these kinds of things? So then there were some follow-up studies where they did lower intensity, lower than what we would imagine would ever work in you guys. Okay, 3 months, 5 days a week with some low intensity stuff. Okay, somewhere down in the 40 to maybe 60% of one rep max range, and they found improvements in balance and mobility, improvements in strength, improvements in muscle mass from doing this even kind of lower, somewhat lower intensity training. Okay, so in older individuals, in a lot of instances, doing anything will work. Okay? A lot of them have been since sedentary. Okay. All right. So now let's talk about, so on the strength side, all right, we're going to come back to kind of some functional assessments of strength. Let's talk about what happens with the kind of cardiovascular and aerobic metabolic system. We see similar declines, okay? VO2 max tends to decline about 5 mLs per kg per minute per decade. So imagine whatever you guys got from your 6-minute walk test in our lab number 2. Okay, at 30, you guys are going to be 5 mLs per kg per minute down from that. At 40, you're going to be down 10 mLs per kg per minute. Okay? And so we know that you have to have a VO2 max of around somewhere between 12 and 15 mLs per kg per minute to be able to just get up and walk around and do all the things. So for some of you, I remember what your number was, right? Some of you are, 30 years from being here, right? Some of you are at 50. I may be just walking around is going to be kind of a max out kind of thing. Okay? Just keep all of that in mind. One of the reasons that this goes down is that age-determined max heart rate is going to decline over time, so max cardiac output goes down. We can't do much about that. We have weakened respiratory muscles, and we also have, when we have our atherosclerosis, it becomes more difficult for us to deliver oxygen blood to working skeletons. So one of the things that we tend to see is here's just showing, these are people that had very high VO2 max values, okay, when they were even at 45 years of age. These are people that we've looked at, and we can find folks that train a whole bunch. You can have these very high levels. They can even be out into their 70s and at around 40 mLs per kg per minute. We do, no matter how trained you are, continue to see some of these sorts of declines. This is men, this is women. But the important thing is these are people that are training kind of their whole life. The important thing to remember is that these folks are, project all of this out, are to be 85 or 90 years old and still have VO2 max values above 30. Right? So this means that these people can very easily get up and down stairs, they can carry heavier loads, and those types of things. Okay? So having a high value now and continuing to train has lots of benefits. Right? So much like with resistance training, in older individuals, if we do aerobic training, we can maintain or improve their VO2 max. We can all stay about the same. Okay. A lot of the things that happen are because people stop being active on sedentary. Okay. This is a picture of one of the most famous exercise physiologists in the world, his name is David Costall. He could probably beat me at a 10-kilometer race even right now, and I think he's in his early 90s at this particular game. Okay? But we know if you will stay active, you will continue to train, that you can prevent a large portion of the age-associated loss. Okay? Similar to resistance training, if you can maintain VO2 max, then you have good cardiovascular health, you continue to have better balance and mobility, you can get around better, do activities of daily living, you've got less chance of becoming type 2 diabetic, and in a lot of ways can counteract a lot of the other age-associated things. Okay? There is some inevitable loss of muscle and strength and some inevitable loss of aerobic capacity as we age. That's just an inevitability. Right? But we can maintain a huge amount of it by continuing to be active, by continuing to walk and run and bike. Okay. So we're going to take a break here for about 5 minutes. Okay. Then we're going to come back and talk about a couple of the ways that we assess function in older adults that you guys may encounter as you go on in grad school and things. So we will take a break here. So we'll come back at let's come back at 11:12. Okay. All right. So the next little bit of stuff that I want to talk about is, let's say you've aged, okay? I have aged, unfortunately. I know it every morning when I wake up. How do we know at what point, right, I've had enough of a change in strength or VO2 max or function or something to say that things aren't working very well and I need help at home, or I need this kind of minimum level of things, okay? And so part of this question was answered by a woman who was, when she did this with the University of Washington, before I was at the University of Georgia, when I was there, her name is Elaine Kress, and they came up with something that you guys will see that was called the Functional Performance Scale, or the Functional Performance Test, okay? And so what they did was they developed this battery of real life things you have to do. And they see how much of it can you do in a certain time, how many cans can you put in your bag and carry, and things, and then try to reverse engineer from that. What are people actually able to do? Okay. And so in their original paper, they tested almost 200 people who were almost 80 years old. They did this functional performance test, which we're going to call the CSPFP. And I'll walk you guys through what that is in a few. They did a VO2 max test in these people, and then they measured their knee extensor strength. Okay. And what they found was that if we look at their score on these functional assessments, that a score of about 57 out of 100, okay, is the threshold at which you're no longer able to kind of be a free living person and do most of your normal activities. Okay. And so we used to have a setup for this over in Collins when I was first hired. But this test involves like walking upstairs. It involves putting cans in a grocery bag and carrying them a certain distance. You have to fold laundry. You have to make a bed. Okay. You have to pick up objects off the floor in a certain amount of time. And then you do the 6-minute walk test, like what you guys did to estimate your max. There's a host of things that are in there. Okay. And I always remember, so it's scored out of 100, not that that means anything. It is basically impossible to score 100. They had one of the labs that would do this a bunch when I was a grad student. We would go up there. We knew how the thing was scored, and were all relatively healthy and functional, and could not ever manage to get a perfect score. and get to 100. Okay, but this is a thing that can be set up in PT clinics, in hospitals, in workout spaces, wherever you want. Like we can set it up in a room that looks just like this. You don't need that much actual stuff. And you can, based upon how people score on all of this, you don't need to do a VO2 max test. You don't have to do a strength assessment on them. And we can guess like how sort of functionally free living are they. And then you can use that measure to see, is my rehab working, is my training program, et cetera, et cetera. So they found that if you look at people's ability to perform on functional tasks, that when you graph that against their oxygen consumption, that there seemed to be a threshold level of about 20 mLs per kg per minute of kind of minimal VO2 max, where if you lost some of that, your function was going to go down. You know that, you can see the stuff from sort of peak VO2, they had folks that were down at like 5. These are very, very, very unfit people. They could do almost nothing. There's this kind of increasing in function ability as max goes up. When you get to about here, and even as my peak VO2 goes up, my functional ability is not, there's not some corresponding kind of predictable increase from there. So they decided, or they went on based upon their data, say that about 20 is where we're shooting for. Okay? If we can get and keep older individuals at about 20, that should be a reasonable place to be able to do kind of some things. They also figured out that from a knee extensor strength standpoint, you'd like to have about 2.5 Newton meters per kilogram of body weight. Not that a lot of that works out that well. So we'll take us what that is in pounds. Newton meters. So this is about 1 3/4 pounds of knee extensor strength per kilogram of body. Okay. So if you are a 50-kilogram person, okay, you need about 75 pounds of knee extensor strength. Could you do knee extension with 75 pounds? Okay, so on and so forth. So that's about what we're looking at. The graph looks the same. As strength goes up, your performance on the functional task goes up, right up to a particular point, and then after that, having more strength doesn't seem to afford you a lot of change. Okay. So a pretty interesting and a pretty fun kind of task thing to try to set up and be able to assess, because each of the individual tasks test something a little bit different. Okay? Do you have low back flexibility? Can you bend over? Can you pick up things? Can you fold things? Do you have finger dexterity? Can you make a bed? They all require slightly different things. And you can look at how people do on each sort of subscale and then target training or therapy or something to specifically address those. Okay. So there's a whole bunch of other kind of questionnaires and things that are very commonly used. Depending upon kind of what you guys choose to go on and do in life. I have seen a lot of these used in physical therapy clinics, certainly are used in hospitals and OT kinds of things. And they're actually very useful if you ever want to do sort of training stuff in older adults. But there's something called the SF-36, which is a kind of a quality of life questionnaire that is very, very commonly used. The SF just stands for short form, but it has a physical function scale, and it asks you, like, can you climb stairs and things of that nature. And so that's a very commonly used one. There's a fall efficacy scale that we can use. There's a mental state examination. There's the Steam Form CATS, ADL, activities of daily living index. All of them are trying to get at the same kind of thing. Okay. What is it that you can do today? And how does that relate to your ability to kind of function on your own without any sort of assistance? Okay. Which is a big concern. Additional functional tests that are not kind of the full-on CSPFP things that we saw as part of the senior fit test, okay? And we used to do a couple of these when we would do some lab things, where there's a thing called a time get up and go. You're sitting, you say, Devin, stand up, walk 6 meters, turn around and go back. And you start the clock, and it's from I'm sitting, both feet on the ground, not holding. How long does it take me to stand up and walk a certain distance? Okay? That's very predictive of things. Remember the senior fit test? You do an arm curl. You do the number of times you can stand up out of a chair, assuming you can in 30 seconds. The time to button test, it measures dexterity and kind of quickness as you touch these buttons as quickly as you can. A functional reach test, it can be sit and reach, it can be shoulder kind of reach, things to help us assess range of motion. So there's lots of these things that can help us get a sense of kind of how well it is. Okay. Talk about this, talk about functional reach test. So in addition to the PFP, there's some of these other ones that are going to all kind of get at the same thing. We're going to do multiple tests to try to get this comprehensive assessment. Okay? I'm not going to ask you guys specific questions about all of these things. I'm not going to say, what does the better balance test look like? What does the ortho index look like? I just like to present them because doing stuff with older adults is very common in clinical settings. So lots of pieces of these tests are very often used for significant. Okay. So like you can look here like on the Barthel index, it says things like, can you feed yourself? Okay. Do you need help cutting your food or putting butter on something or requiring some kind of modification? Or are you completely independent? Can you bathe yourself? Do you need some help with all of that? Okay. Are you independent or can you take a shower? Do you need help with personal care? Things like combing your hair, brushing your teeth, shaving, right? And so it gets at all of these kinds of things to figure out, are you able to do all of the stuff you might want to? Okay. There's some pictures of the CSPFP and those kinds of things. Dr. Pinky put some of these together. This is at Clemson, which I told him we put cover over all of this, at least find the one at Georgia. And it's all the same thing. You have this like modified, like this little stair thing. The one in Georgia, they had this and they painted a big bus on the wall and you're like walking up the stairs to get on the bus. But they have shelves and they have all of this, you know, cans and bottles of juice and stuff, and you put them in your little bag and carry them around and walk, right? Do the 6-minute walk test and those kinds of things. So this is the stuff that typically happens in CSP. Balance test, I put a lot of these things in there. You do a time one leg stance. We used to do this in lab too, which I always found fun. It's like who can stand like this for the longest period of time. Right, best of all of us. Who can do that, right? Then I walk up and I'm telling you to like close your eyes or open your eyes and what happens. If there's some things like that. 6-minute walk test. So one of the reasons that we do grip strength, even though it's a terrible measure, is that there's a lot of data on grip strength and sarcopenia and grip strength aging. And what we figured out is that for functional independence, men need to have about a 30 kilogram grip strength, women need to have about 20 kilograms grip strength. So this is again is a very easy, simple test that people can do, try to get an estimate of what's happening. So what do we recommend? Basically, we recommend training and activity on the same levels for older adults as we do for everybody else. Okay. It would be really, really good to get your 150 minutes, and really important in older adults to try to get the strength training portion in the midst of all of that. But we just need to have the considerations of they're older, they might fall down, right? Maybe put them on a bike or something with that body weight supported things. Kind of relax with their other functions. That's pretty much it. It's not a particularly wild or crazy kind of thing. So here's my question. We'll finish with all of this, partially because my voice I feel like is about to leave us all. So I'll my mask off for a minute so y'all can hear me. So I'm gonna be brave. Hopefully none of you have Omicron or whatever it is we're calling the new variant. I've had my booster shot. If I can get a booster, if you get a booster, you're 6 months out, we'll get your booster. I didn't feel too bad. My wife was she was real sick again from the booster. So what do you think on all of this? We'll start with you. Based upon what you've seen today, can I prevent aging with physical activity and exercise? Yes.
Well, maybe the effect. I
Okay.
mean, everyone's gonna age.
Unfortunately, we are all going to age. I have to walk by the stupid. I need to let Danny take a new picture. But I have to walk by our stupid TVs every day and see my headshot that they're using. I'm like, oh, look at that little baby. So I'm like, yes, those were the days. But yes, there's a part of aging, right, that we're not going to be able to, that we can't counteract, right? You're going to get older. That is inevitable. But maybe I can prevent some of the consequences. Okay. Anybody disagree? Devin, Kathy, what do you guys think?
I agree, like, I think exercise like helps, maybe like with strength and maybe it slows the like decline. When you're
Okay.
older, but like you can't.
Kathy?
Yeah, I agree. Younger you start,
Yes. Yes. Younger you start. Or do stop now so that when you are inevitably less active when you are older, you've got farther, you got a bigger range that you can fall before things get really bad. The ideal world is to keep doing things. Okay. Because you get to be my age, and I'm like, Ellis, you weigh like 40 pounds now, and I have to help you up the stairs at home. And I get to the top of the stairs, and I'm like, why am I out of breath? This is terrible. That's mostly because I'm just somewhat out of shape in those ways. Okay. But that's kind of the key, that we probably can't prevent aging itself, but we can prevent a lot of poor consequences. A lot of poor consequences. So many of you may think now, someday I'm going to be retired. I'm not going to have to work. I'm not going to have to go to school, and I'm going to, I don't know, whatever it is you want to do. I'm going to play golf all the time. I'm going to go fishing. I don't know whatever it is you guys like to do. I'm just going to Netflix, whatever that version of Netflix is. And you'd like to be able to do all of those things. So do stuff now. Do stuff now. Okay. All right. That's what I got. We got one more lecture day on Monday. Remember, next Friday, your final project is due. I want to mention two things on the final project. Okay, two things that I've already been asked questions about. There are some boxes in the little grid where I put things. Okay, where it may say what is the class, what is their kind of normative classification, where there are not norms. Okay, for instance, if you look at the person's bench press 1 rep max, there's a place where it says, here's what their 1 rep max value is. Then there's a blank part of the grid next to it. We don't have normative classifications for 1 rep max. Okay. I just made the grid and there's just an open box there. The normative values are for bench press, so they're 1 rep max to their body weight ratio. Okay. So you only have to fill in the boxes for the things that we actually have provided you normative values. Okay. Does that make sense? I just want to clarify that. It's not like there's some where you're like, oh God, this isn't here. I can't find it. Am I supposed to look up and find this all by myself? No, no, no. That was just me being somewhat lazy and just making a grid and not taking that box out or putting like, don't put anything here. Okay. That's one. I remember what the second one was. it will come to me, and I'll put it on. Okay, but if you have questions, right?
For the training program, are we just supposed to use that little box at the end? And put like
That's what it is, yes. So, all you have to do, okay, the minimum that you have to do is to try to use the box and the things that I provided. Okay? I try to give you some structure and to make it a little more kind of concise and organized. If you want to do much more than that, by all means, knock yourself out, but you don't have to. Okay. And in that box, that was what the other one was. In the box, it says like, it will do like frequency, intensity, time, type, and then it will say exercises. I've had questions about, are the type and the exercises the same, like the same kind of thing? I put, we're going to do squats and knee extension and this, then does that go type or does that go in exercises? And those things are going to be the same. And my answer is it doesn't really matter. Like you could put under type resistance training and then list what the exercises are. Or you could just put, here are the exercises and just put them under like either type or exercise. I just want you guys to know that I'm wanting you to put out a little bit more than just saying resistance training or running or walking or something. Okay. But no, that was there. I just put that together so you guys would have something to kind of easily sort of organize for all of that. Okay. Phoebe.
For the workout next, defined by the body weight, is it any movements or is it?
The ratio will be the same as long as both the bench press weight and the body weight are in the same units. So if you want to use pounds for both, you're going to get the same answer as if you use kilograms for both. But you can't mix and have body weight in kilograms and weight lifting on 1 rep max in pounds. You can't do that. Okay, it's a good question. Anything else? When you're trying to do the percent body fat calculations using the skin folds, round everything to 4 significant digits. Okay? That will seem wild, but that's going to get you the kind of most precise numbers. Okay? Some of you are probably like, what is he talking about? I haven't looked at this thing yet. That is also perfectly okay. So Monday we'll do anxiety, depression, and some other kind of interesting things on mental health. Wednesday of next week will be a review day. Then our test is Wednesday, final week, at like 8 o'clock in the morning. So, let me look at the amount of time. So it's a regular test with a few comprehensive questions. The comprehensive material that you will need to know is listed on the study guide. Okay? That's the information you need to know. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Okay. Let me look at how long we have. We might be able to push the start time back a little bit. We have a 2-hour window or
Yeah.
a 3-hour.
2 hour.
Oh, it's only a 2-hour
It's from
window?
8 to 10.
Okay. So I wouldn't want to push that back. We can start at 8. Or we can, if you want to be here at 8 to start, you can start at 8. I will say that. If you want to roll in at 8:30 or something, that's also fine, but I can't get you past 10. So, okay. That's it. That's what I got.